now we're going to open up for questions. And I thought that I'll ask the first question. And after I ask the question, when we have 4 microphones, I believe. It's hard to see from here. And we'll go around the audience. And when you ask a question, please state your name and your affiliation. So the question I have is for Nick Billotti. And today, especially with this austere group of professionals and students, buildings are being built taller, more complex, more sophisticated. We're coming up with new techniques of structure to make them lighter and faster to build, yet you're building in areas of the world that don't necessarily have the infrastructure as we have in New York, Chicago, and other cities. So what are some of the challenges that you have when you go into areas that have never had this kind of building built? And secondly, and how do you deal with the risks involved from a technological standpoint, because you need to execute what we design?
Another softball question. No, that's a very good question, and we do operate in a number of locales where the infrastructure seems to come after the building, when it should be the other way around, where the infrastructure is in place to support so much of what a community would like to build out. For us, as we begin in the planning process for a new building, it's clearly to understand what some of the limitations are with the infrastructure. We can make those points to the clients, we can make those points to the government, and we see that in many cases they respond relatively quickly to building out infrastructure in support of the projects. If you're speaking to the infrastructure of our industry to support the technologies that are going into these very large and sophisticated buildings, we are a global business. We reach out for partners worldwide to come in and participate. While we will always strive to maximize local content in anything and everything we do, we have to recognize where there is limitations on the technologies that have been developed and exist locally, and supplement those with the technologies that we'll find in other places with other companies to match. And it may be for something which was, actually complicated, as developing the concrete mix for the Burj Khalifa, where we're pumping concrete to new levels. I think, Matt, it was 600 feet or 800 feet, we're pumping concrete. And we had experts coming in from various parts of the world, including the manufacturer of the concrete pump. We had various technical structural engineers. We had the contractor who ultimately built the building, Samsung, under our supervision. We worked with the architects. And it is partnering early in the process to recognize some of the technical challenges and to deal with them before we have to deal with them when we're out there in the field accomplishing the construction. And that's a part answer to a fairly large question.
I'm sure it's not easy. First question, gentleman in the second row.
Hi, my name is Ian. I'm a student here at IIT. My question was for Mr. Wong. When developing the Park Royale and the landscape that is at the platforms, what aspects did you guys look into the plants you chose for those gardens and how their roots would interact with the concrete systems of the building?
We have been doing this for quite a number of years now, and there are systems in place now in Singapore and also maybe in South Asia that allows planting to take place in buildings. And in terms of planting materials, it's a little challenging because when you're elevated, the wind speed's a little higher. So you do need to choose plant materials that could handle a little stronger winds. And this is actually quite easy. If you just notice coastal areas, you can actually see what are the plant materials that you can actually select. So it's just looking at nature again and see what are the plants that you can have. I mean, most plantings and trees and all don't have very deep roots. You only need something like 600 to a meter of soil depth. And I'm not saying that we will end up with humongous trees on the buildings, but you will have small to medium-sized trees thriving very well on such landscapes and buildings.
Next question, the back on my left.
Hi, my name is June with Gensler. I'm an architect. I have a question for the Park Royal also. From this year's, the garden building as well as last year's interlace, it also happens in Singapore. My question is that for all the green buildings, obviously it all comes with a premium. It heavily depends on the client request and their incentives. Is there anything special for Singapore as a government that will actually make more incentives for the client to pursue this type of building?
In Singapore, when we first did the idea of Sky Gardens, it was in Newton Suites, something like almost 8 to 10 years ago. And when we first did it, there was no government incentive to actually do it. We actually were able to convince the client that that was a nice architectural feature to have, and also a good feature for the residents in an apartment to actually enjoy. Subsequently, when the government saw that that was actually a very nice idea and that the developers actually could do it on their own, the government wanted to push this even further and made it compulsory for all buildings in the central business district area to actually have a 100% green replacement. But when they came up with this new requirement, they also acknowledged that all these areas will not be counted as a gross floor area. So no development charge will actually impose on it. We have been quite successful in implementing some of these landscape ideas overseas. And it doesn't make sense for you in an area which is not dense, where you have so much space, you could actually have real gardens on ground. But in very dense, high-rise environment and in mega cities, I think it's actually quite a good idea to actually have these gardens. It does bring relief to it. And that we have been pushing for this in some of our overseas development, particularly in China and India, where the density is really high, higher than Singapore, and that providing some of these do provide relief to the developments. And while the government of those countries don't exactly incentivize sky gardens, the developer themselves saw the merit in it and were quite prepared to actually carve out some areas, sell the other areas at a slightly higher price to make up for it. So it is quite possible.
Next question on the left.
Hi, my name is Rudy from the College of Architecture. My question is for HOLEDECK. With your design, how would it hold up in a seismic area?
Can you repeat, please? Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah. How would the design of your concrete hold up in a seismic area?
Sorry, my English is not very good. Okay, so in one of the slides, you can see that what we do is it's like a beam, no? And so we take the material that you don't use for the shear stress. So the holes are placed in the way that the structure keeps working well, but at the same time doesn't lose the strength that it needs to work. You can see there in one of the pictures of the presentation. Is okay, or is?
Okay. Next question, up front row, Anthony.
Munsum, I have to ask you this. I think your work is amazing. second to none, amazing. But it's in Singapore, where if you stand still long enough, you're going to sprout vegetation yourself. You are blessed with a fantastic climate in Singapore. And when I show your projects around the world, which I do, especially in an American context, developers shake their head and say, could never happen in Chicago, could never happen in New York, because of
can add a lot of cost to the project. So if it takes 1,000 hours, man-hours to form a deck, how much extra time does it take with the whole deck to put that on the deck, to strip it? And how many reuses of those do you get? Do they last 6 times or 10 times?
Our plastic molds are reusable. So with just one floor molds, you can build a tall building. That means that you can export just 2 containers anywhere in the world, and you can make a tall building because you can reuse the molds more or less between 50 and 100 times. It depends on how you treat them. And talking about the speed of building, it depends on how you organize it, but it can be similar to any other concrete slab systems, like waffle slab or like flat slabs. It's more or less similar. It's a little bit more work, but just a little bit, because if you see the videos in our webpage, you can check that we have 2 extra molds for the lateral windows, but they are very easy to take and to put. So it has been thought in an industrial way. Another thing is that actually we are working even in developing faster and quicker systems with inflatable molds and other technologies that could even increase more the speed of use, because we know that when you make a tall building, the speed is essential, you know, because you need to be making 1 floor, it's 2 floors each week. Or we try to be competitive with steel structures. That we know that the steel structures are very common in the States, but at the same time we think that the concrete is more sustainable. I know that we can talk about it for a long time, but at the end, if you make numbers, it keeps being a cheapest and more sustainable solution. The steel has, of course, a wide range of uses and is better in certain projects, and in other projects I think it's better to use concrete slabs.